The glass tower of Hale Enterprises gleamed against the New York skyline, but inside the atmosphere was anything but bright. Rumors echoed through the marble lobby and up the high-rise elevators no one could survive as assistant to Rebecca Hale, the iron-willed CEO. She was sharp as steel, relentless in her demands, a woman who had built an empire with sheer intellect and unshakable control. But the same qualities that made her powerful had also made her feared. Assistants came and went. Like falling dominoes, some lasted a week, others a single day. Most walked out with tear-streaked faces, swearing never to return. Rebecca's top-floor office felt more like a battlefield than a workplace. Phones rang, schedules shifted, and meetings crashed into one another like waves in a storm. She ruled from behind a sleek glass desk, her voice precise, her eyes cold. To her business was survival, and survival required toughness. She didn't have time for weakness, excuses, or mistakes. And yet beneath all the whispered fear there lingered a question that no one dared ask out loud. What kind of life did a woman like Rebecca Hale live when the doors closed, when the lights of the city flickered against her office windows, and she was left alone in the silence? This was the world unforgiving, relentless, that soon would collide with the most unlikely of men, a janitor named David Miller, a single dad with nothing to prove except to his little girl, and everything to change for the woman no one believed could be touched. Down in the basement of that same skyscraper, far from the polished boardrooms and echoing hallways of power, David Miller pushed a mop across the cold tile floors. At 42, his back ached more than it used to, and his hands bore the calluses of a man who worked too hard for too little. Yet there was a gentleness about him, something in the way he hummed old country tunes under his breath, or how his eyes softened when his daughter's picture taped to his locker caught his gaze. Her name was Lily, 10 years old, with hair that tangled every morning and a smile that could cut through even the darkest of days. David was her world, and she was his. Since his wife's passing 3 years earlier, every decision he made, every hour of overtime, every penny saved had been for her. While others in the building carried leather briefcases and spoke of stocks and mergers, David carried lunch pails and second-hand storybooks. He wasn't bitter, just tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of sweeping floors while men in suits tracked mud across them. Still, he never complained. His dignity lay in quiet perseverance in showing Lily that even without riches, a man could live with honor. That night, as he emptied wastebaskets outside the executive wing, voices carried through an open office door. Another assistant had quit, storming out in tears, the echo of high heels fading down the marble corridor. The staff snickered, shaking their heads. No one lasts with Rebecca Hale. Not a soul. David lingered a moment, listening, his mop bucket squeaking faintly on the polished floor. He had no idea then that within hours fate would drag him from the shadows of the janitor's closet into the blinding spotlight of the top floor face to face with the woman no one dared to serve. The next morning began like any other, for David Coffey, from a paper cup, the smell of bleach lingering on his clothes. But as he wheeled his cart past the HR office, a flustered manager spotted him. "Miller, wait," she called, desperation sharp in her tone. Within minutes, David found himself ushered into a glass conference room, surrounded by anxious staff. Rebecca Hale's new assistant had quit in spectacular fashion the night before, leaving behind a half-finished calendar and a CEO with no patience for incompetence. Meetings were stacked, investors were flying in, and without someone to manage the storm, the company risked collapse. "We just need you for one day," the manager insisted, shoving a thick binder into David's hands. "Answer her calls, take notes, keep her on schedule. Anyone else will crack, but maybe you'll last until we find a replacement." David stared at the binder, its weight heavier than any mop he'd ever lifted. "I clean floors," he said quietly. I don't belong in an office. Then think of it as cleaning chaos, the manager shot back. Do this, and we'll make sure your overtime gets approved. Please. Moments later, David stepped into the top floor, for the first time, his heart pounding. The office smelled of leather and glass, the city skyline stretching like a painted backdrop behind Rebecca Hale's desk. She didn't even look up when he entered. "You're late," she said coldly, though the clock showed he wasn't. "Coffee black. 2 sugars. Then clear my schedule and don't speak unless I ask you to." Her words cut like knives, but David didn't flinch. He nodded once, steady and calm, then moved with quiet purpose. He had faced far harsher storms in his life: grief, loneliness, the fear of raising a child alone. Compared to that one powerful woman with sharp edges didn't scare him. And so while the rest of the building waited for the janitor to crumble, David Miller rolled up his sleeves and began the longest, most unexpected day of his life. From the moment he set her coffee down, Rebecca Hale seemed determined to break him. Her words were clipped, her demands relentless. "Reschedule the board at noon, no, make it 1. Draft an email to Tokyo, and if you miss a single number, you're done. And while you're at it, these files better be on my desk before I finish this call." Assistants before him would have panicked, their hands trembling over the keyboard. But David simply nodded, rolling up his sleeves, and went to work. He didn't type with speed or polish, but with care. He double-checked the numbers, wrote with plain, steady language, and when Rebecca glanced at the finished draft, her brow furrowed, half expecting mistakes, but finding none. Still, she pushed harder. She ordered him to arrange overlapping meetings, barked his name across the office, even corrected his posture when he stood too close to the window. To her surprise, David never snapped back. He listened, adjusted, and moved on without complaint. By evening, when the building had emptied and the city lights flickered across her office windows, Rebecca found him still at his post sorting files, with the same quiet focus he once gave a mop bucket. Her stomach growled loud enough to embarrass her. She hadn't eaten all day. Before she could speak, David set down a small thermos on her desk. "Homemade chicken soup," he said simply, almost shy. "Made it for my daughter this morning. There's enough for 2. Rebecca blinked, her usual sharp retort caught in her throat. No one had ever dared bring her food, much less something warm, homemade, and offered without angle or agenda. She said nothing, just stared at the steam curling from the lid. For the first time in years, the cold glass walls of her office felt thinner, like someone had found a crack. The night dragged on, papers piled high, and Rebecca's voice grew hoarse from back-to-back calls. She stepped out to the window for a moment of silence, her reflection blending with the Manhattan skyline. That's when she heard Ite, a low murmur from the corner office David had been using. His tone was softer, warmer, nothing like the steady resolve he showed her all day. "Hey, sweetheart, yeah, Daddy's still at work. Did you finish your math homework?" "Good girl." Rebecca froze. His words weren't meant for her, but they filled the sterile air with something she hadn't felt in years' tenderness. "Don't worry. He'll tuck you in when I get home. Even if you're asleep, he'll be there. You know that, right?" His voice cracked slightly, just enough for her to hear the weight behind it. Rebecca turned away quickly, blinking against a rush of emotion she didn't expect. She'd spent decades building walls so high that kindness rarely slipped through. Hearing a father pour his heart into a phone call with his little girl stirred something long buried, memories of empty dinners at her childhood home. A father who measured love in dollars, not presents. When David hung up and noticed her standing there, he straightened awkwardly, almost embarrassed. "Sorry, Ms. Hale. Just checking in with my daughter. He'll get back to—" She surprised herself with what came next. "What's her name?" He blinked. "Lily." Rebecca nodded slowly, her voice quieter than usual. "She's lucky to have you." For a heartbeat, the office fell still. No commands, no clipped remarks, just 2 people caught in a rare moment of honesty. And though neither said it aloud, something in Rebecca's eyes softened like a storm cloud, thinning just enough for sunlight to break through. The next morning arrived like a storm. Rebecca's office buzzed with tension. An investor had threatened to pull millions from a major deal, and the board demanded answers within the hour. Staff scrambled through corridors, voices sharp with panic. Rebecca sat rigid at her desk, jaw tight, scanning reports that seemed to grow more hopeless by the minute. David, standing quietly at the corner, with a notepad, watched the chaos unfold. He didn't understand the jargon of balance sheets or global markets, but he did understand people. And right now the room was spinning out of control. When Rebecca snapped at an analyst for the third time, David cleared his throat. "Ms. Hale, may I say something?" The room went still. A janitor turned assistant daring to speak during a financial crisis was unthinkable. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, but something in his calmness made her pause. "Go on," she said flatly. David stepped forward. "You're trying to keep them from leaving. But what if you showed them what they'd lose if they did? Not numbers, not charts, just the truth. Remind them why they came to you in the first place. You built this company on trust. Maybe it's time you remind them of that." Silence. Then slowly Rebecca leaned back, considering his words. It wasn't strategy from a textbook, but something raw human and strangely brilliant. Minutes later, she entered the boardroom, David's suggestion echoing in her mind. Her tone was fierce but honest, her eyes steady as she spoke of vision, loyalty, and a future worth believing in. By the time she finished, the investors were nodding, not walking. The deal stood firm. When she returned to her office, the mask of steel had cracked. For the first time, she looked at David not as a disposable helper, but as an equal. "You just saved this company," she admitted softly. David gave a modest shrug. "Just common sense, ma'am." But Rebecca knew better. It was more than common sense. It was heart. And in a world where she trusted no one, that was something she didn't know she needed until now. That night, the city hummed softly beyond Rebecca Hale's penthouse windows. For the first time in years, she wasn't poring over contracts or barking orders. She was quiet, thoughtful, her gaze resting on the man who had stepped into her life so unexpectedly. David sat across from her, his tie, loose eyes tired, but kind. On the coffee table between them lay Lily's school project-a-paper castle she had shown Rebecca earlier with pride. Rebecca lifted it gently, her voice unsteady. "She reminds me of what I never had growing up. A father who stayed, a home that felt safe." David met her eyes, unsure how to respond. Then Rebecca took a breath, her steel exterior finally giving way. "David, you and Lily don't belong in the shadows of this building. You belong here with me." He blinked, stunned. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," she interrupted softly, "that maybe we could build something more than a company. Maybe we could build a family." The words hung in the air, fragile, yet powerful. And in that moment, the ruthless CEO the world feared was simply a woman reaching for connection. And the janitor who once swept her floors had become the man who swept down the walls she thought unbreakable. Sometimes the strongest power isn't money or status or control. It's kindness. A single act of patience, a single word of compassion can pierce through the hardest armor and change the course of someone's life. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that reminds us all of the simple, life-changing power of love and humanity.